Hi, Sean here, one half of Sean and Kiara. We are the co-creators of Lucy in the Sky, a graphic novel for middle grade readers published by First Second. Our second graphic novel, Rhiannon, will be out in October of 2025. If you like the things we do, please consider supporting us by becoming a paying member of our Patreon site for $4 a month. And if you enjoy videos like this, hit the like and subscribe buttons, as it'll help us build this channel. Thank you, and enjoy the video. Hello, and welcome back to Reading Tintin, A Personal View. And this time we are taking a look at Prisoners of the Sun, which is the 14th volume of the Tintin series, and part 2 of a two-parter, starting with the 7 crystal balls. And this would have been the second of the 3 two-parter stories that we find in the Adventures of Tintin. The first being The Secret of the Unicorn and Red Rackham's Treasure, and the third, which comes after this one, Destination Moon and Explorers on the Moon. And I guess you could say that Cigars of the Pharaoh and The Blue Lotus are a two-parter as well, and they, I believe they were serialized kind of in that way as a Tintin Reporter in the Far East, I think the series, the serialization was originally called. But those two are a little different. They are much more standalone adventures. They are connected. The Blue Lotus does continue on from where the Cigars of the Pharaoh leaves off and continues some of the story there. But you could read them both separately and wouldn't really miss much. That said, however, I read The Prisoners of the Sun when I was a kid. It was one of the first Tintin adventures that I read when I visited my relatives in Canada. They had these books before I did. And it wasn't until I bought my own copy, along with the volume that comes before it, part 1 of this adventure, the 7 crystal balls, that I actually got the full story. So so even the two-parters, you can read them and enjoy them. And in my case, I had to wait a few years before I got the beginning of the story filled in, and some details and some explanation on things that I had wondered about. So this was 7 Crystal Balls and Prisoners of the Sun. It began serialization in Le Soir, which was the largest French-language daily newspaper in Belgium at the time, and it had been taken over by the Nazis during World War II and had become pretty much a voice then of the Nazis and a supporter of the German war effort, along with a lot of anti-Semitic propaganda, Nazi propaganda, and things like that. And Herge, who was wanting to find an outlet for Tintin, a publisher for Tintin, accepted an offer that Tintin run as a serial in Le Soir. And this, of course, got him into trouble. After the war, he was branded a collaborator and a traitor. So when Belgium was liberated, the serialization of what was then what was to become the 7 Crystal Balls stopped. It was probably around page 50 of what we have in that volume now. And then there was a hiatus of about 2 years in which Herge was not able to find work. He was on a blacklist of people who had worked for German-controlled publications during the war. And it wasn't until he got a certificate of good citizenship and another offer to publish Tintin as a serialization that he was able to start the story up again. And this didn't happen until 2 years later. So it stopped in 1944 with the liberation of Belgium, And it wasn't until 1946 that he was able to take up the story again. And the circumstances for that were sort of interesting. So, as I said, he was having trouble finding a place that would publish him. He was pretty much on the outs among in Belgian society, having been a contributor to a Nazi-owned publication. And it wasn't until a person by the name of Raymond Leblanc pretty much came to his rescue. Now, Leblanc was a member of one of the resistance organizations fighting the Nazis. He was a resistance fighter. And the resistance group that he was a part of was one of the more right-wing leaning parties. And originally they had kind of a fascist sort of outlook to them at first. But eventually they became anti-German, and they became part of the wider resistance. They were basically right-wing conservative monarchist. They were in support of the King of Belgium being reinstalled and sort of, becoming kind of a sort of a dictatorship under the king of Belgium. But he had, Raymond Leblanc had resistance credentials, so he was kind of seen as a hero among the Belgians. And he was able to obtain a certificate of good citizenship for Herge. He had been a fan of Tintin when he was younger, and he believed that because Herge kept publishing Tintin during the war, that it was one of the things that being able to read Tintin during the war was one of the things that kept up the morale of many of Belgians. And so he was grateful that Herge did that. And so he offered Herge to run Tintin again in a magazine that he wanted to call Tintin Magazine, which would be sort of a comics showcase. So it would feature serialization of several comic strips, not just Tintin, but other strips from other Belgian comics artists. And Herge, how could he refuse such an offer? So in 1946, the first issue of Tintin magazine appeared and began the serialization of a story that was being called The Temple of the Sun. And it continued where Le Soir, the strip in Le Soir, had left off. And so it finished the storyline of the 7 crystal balls. We reworked a little bit of it at the end, and then continued the story up through the end of what would become this volume, Prisoners of the Sun. And finally, the 2 volumes were collected in book form in 1948. So 5 years from the time that it first started serialization during the war in Le Soir. And right off, one of the things that I really admired about this book and about a lot of the other Tintin books was just the artistry was really at its peak, and not just the drawing of the strips themselves, but this title page here with this Incan design, and Herge and Edgar P. Jacobs, who was collaborating with him and helped a lot with the design and the decor and the backgrounds and so forth. They really did their research to give it a quality presentation. So we start off where the last volume ended, with Tintin and Captain Haddock having disembarked from Belgium on the trail of their friend Professor Calculus, who's been kidnapped, they think, by South American abductors who may be connected with may be connected with the ancient Inca in some way. They still don't know what's going on. And so the trail takes them to Peru, and here they meet up with the chief of police. And right off, Tintin sees somebody has been eavesdropping on them at the window, and he says, clearly an Indian peering through the railings. So there's one of the running gags of this volume is Captain Haddock's relationship with the llamas. And he at first he's tickling him under the chin, and then the llama spits on him. And this, of course, puts him in a very foul mood. And so we see Haddock and Tintin are being followed. We'll find this character popping up again. And who should come on the scene to help with the investigation but Thompson and Thompson? They always find an excuse to be involved. So they're waiting for the ship that they believe Professor Calculus has been abducted and taken aboard. And they find that the ship has been put under quarantine. And of course, they suspect that this is some sort of ruse to keep Tintin and Haddock from finding Calculus on board. Some more hat humor. Thompson's always having something happening to their hats, and this time they see sacks of guano on the dock there, and they say, "I say, what is that stuff, guano, Captain?" And Captain Haddock says, "How shall I put it?" And then a bird flies by. Plop, guano? Well, there's a free sample. And so, as night falls, Tintin and Captain Haddock decide to take matters in their own hands and to row out to the boat and climb aboard. Tintin climbs aboard to see if he can find Professor Calculus on board. Again, really nice nighttime coloring. This is one of the things that I thought Herge really did. With the flat look of the line work, you really have to use the color for effect to set the mood. You're not using a lot of cross-hatching or any kind of shading, so that's where the color really comes in. I mean, these panels would look indistinguishable from a daytime scene, but then you add the color, and it's completely different. And here, Tintin almost has an encounter with an Indian who is on board, and we see that, well, we can't really see too well here, but we'll find out in a minute who it is. We've encountered him before in the last volume. But in the room that he happens to be hiding, he finds Calculus, and Calculus is himself in the coma that the explorers from the 7 crystal balls have all fallen into. He cannot be awakened. Tintin also finds that he has the bracelet of the mummy around his wrist, and with that discovery, the lights come on, and we find out that the Indian here is Chiquito, who was General Alcazar's stage assistant in his knife-throwing act in the last volume. And it's revealed here, Chiquito reveals that Calculus has been kidnapped because he's committed sacrilege by putting on the bracelet of the Inca, and therefore he must die. So, a little bit of a scuffle. Tintin manages to escape. And Haddock is sent to go and try to call the police. He's ringing up Thompson and Thompson, who are sitting there listening to the phone ring. That sounds like the telephone. To be precise, the telephone. Are you going to answer it? Me? Certainly not. How can I? I'm asleep. He says, taking their time, the baboons. You can't sleep, you're talking to me. You know very well that I talk in my sleep. They finally get him on the phone. And then by the light of morning, they manage to come out. But now Tintin is gone from the place that Captain Haddock has left him. And so Haddock manages to follow the road to a village where he encounters a young man who happens to be Tintin in disguise. And Tintin describes to Haddock what he saw on the beach while Captain Haddock was away trying to get the police on the phone that they had gone off with calculus. So Tintin describes how he followed the kidnappers until he saw them get tickets at a train station. And so they decide they're going to go and follow them on the train line and see if they can find them. And as they're getting on the train, here we see the same Indian that's been following them. He has a bit of an exchange with one of the train workers. He said, no, it is impossible. You ask too much. I cannot. It is his order, and you know what happens to those who disobey him. And so off they go and have a good trip, senors. Very nice train. Again, you know, I've mentioned it before. The Tintin books are great for trains, planes, and automobiles, and this has a really nice train sequence here. The trestle on the canyon there is so nicely drawn. I would hate the prospect of having to draw something like this. That just is like such a pain in the neck to draw all these cross beams, but very well done, as always. So Tintin looks out and sees that his car has somehow become disconnected, and they are now traveling backwards downhill. So they attempt to jump off, and of course Captain Haddock makes his spectacular jump. It's a great sequence, just these panels together showing the motion. There he goes, he's stumbling. He begins snowballing down the hill right into a big cactus. And of course Tintin has not jumped, it's going too fast now. So through the tunnel it goes. He's forgotten Snowy. He runs back to get Snowy, but now it's going too fast. So he tries the brake. The brake wheel comes off. What is he going to do? All right, well, they're going over a river. So off he goes down into the river, and he makes it. Eventually they meet up, Captain following the track, along with some railway officials. So they get to the town where the kidnappers were headed with calculus, and they try to describe calculus and the kidnappers to the chief of police, and at first the chief seems interested, but as they're describing him, he seems to change his story, and he says, no, this isn't the person that we saw at all, and in fact, I was mistaken. I'm sorry, I can't be of further assistance to you gentlemen. The interview is closed. So very abruptly. And Tintin thinks that's rather suspicious. So they decide to split up and go around town and ask anybody if they've seen the people they're looking for, and of course everyone says no say, no say, no say. So Tintin comes upon a young boy who's Indian, and he's being harassed by a couple of I guess non-indigenous Peruvians, more of European descent, and he comes to his rescue. This scene kind of reminds me of the scene in The Blue Lotus where he comes to the rescue of the rickshaw driver when he's being attacked by a European. He says, "Aren't you ashamed bullying a child like that?" And we see that he's being observed by the same Indian who's been following them around. And so the big guy decides he's going to take a shot at him. He hits the wall, hurts his hand. Snowy comes to his rescue. They both run off. and the boy has disappeared. But as Tintin is leaving, a voice calls to him from the bushes. He says, "You stop, senor, you listen to me." He tells him to pretend to tie his shoelace and pretend not to hear that the voice is coming from the bushes. He doesn't want to be seen. But he tells him that he knows where his friend has been taken prisoner. He tells him to buy guns and come tomorrow at sunrise to the bridge of the Inca. And so Tintin goes off. He has his instructions. And as he's leaving, the Indian that's been following him approaches him, and he says, "You listen to me, senor. I see that you go to help the Indian boy. You're good. You're brave. But you do not go in search of your friend. Otherwise, you meet many dangers." Tries to persuade Tintin not to continue with his quest to find calculus, but Tintin says, "I can't abandon my friend, but thank you anyway." And so he says, "Well, that is very foolish choice. You still go, then take this. Very good. Help you in danger." And he leaves them with a little medal, a talisman, and then he disappears. So the next morning, Haddock and Tintin have come to the bridge of the Inca, and there is the boy, whose name is Zorino. And he says he's going to act as his guide. He's going to take him to where the people have taken Professor Calculus, where his abductors have taken him. He says it's a very long journey, so he's brought llamas and supplies. And of course, this gives us another opportunity to see Captain Haddock deal with the llamas. And this time, the llama not only takes a bite out of his beard, but spits on him again. Herge was really good at this, sort of, honing in on one gag and then repeating it to great effect as well. It doesn't really get old. It just runs throughout the story, and it keeps getting funnier and funnier. So now they come to an old Incan tomb, and they decide that they're going to stay there for the night. And Captain Haddock is sitting guard outside. Tintin sleeps, and as he's sleeping, he has a dream. Another great thing that Herge does to great effect. You don't see a lot of weird, fantastical scenes in Tintin. The last volume, The Seven Crystal Balls, of course, had a bit of supernatural element to it, which is unusual for the Tintin adventures. But when he does a dream sequence, he does them so over the top and so surreal that they are very effective. And I always loved looking at these and looking at all the little bits that he puts in here. So we've got calculus with his pendulum. And I remember puzzling over what the pendulum meant when I read this originally, because I hadn't read Rackham's Treasure, where we find out why calculus is using his pendulum and why he says a little more to the west. So that was sort of a mystery to me until I was able to read that volume later on. And here we have now Haddock is the Inca, and we have a little mini calculus there. And finally, the fire of heaven is brought down on Tintin, and he wakes up in a shaft of light coming through a chink in the wall. So he calls out for Zorino and Captain Haddock, and no one is around. He manages to find that Captain Haddock has been overcome and tied up behind a rock. And as soon as he's untied, he begins cavorting around. He's had a lizard down his back the whole night. So they decide they've got to set off and try to find Zorino and wherever he's been taken. So they give Zarina's hat to Snowy to try to find his scent, and off they go. A couple hours later, they manage to come down on the path that Zarina's abductors are taking. It is Tintin's effort to come up on them without a sound fails when Haddock comes tumbling down the side of the mountain right into their path. Eventually, though, Haddock and Tintin manage to overcome the abductors and turn the tables on them and free Zarina. And then Tintin orders them off. They find Snowy is still up on the hill on a little bit of a jutting rock there. But as they're looking up at him, a condor swoops down and grabs him. Tintin takes careful aim and manages to get the condor, and then decides to climb up to try to get Snowy. When he gets there, he finds that Snowy is enjoying himself with a bunch of bones that are in the condor nest. On his way back down, though, another condor attacks. It looks pretty vicious. Tintin manages to grab its legs and becomes like a helicopter and manages to land on the ground. Another pratfall with Captain Haddock trying to come to his rescue. So their journey continues, and now they're into the mountains, up into the snow of the mountains, the Andes Mountains. And Captain Haddock is getting a cold, and as he sneezes, he dislodges some snow and causes an avalanche, which comes down on them all, burying them all. They manage to dig their way out, but where's Haddock? They find his foot. They bring him at poor Captain Frozen Stiff. He says, we ought to rub him briskly with alcohol if we had some. I'll bet he has a flask in his hip pocket. There, I knew it. Now let's see. Whiskey, fine. The frozen captain manages to smell the whiskey and grabs it from him. Downs the whole thing, which of course makes him drunk. Then Zarina points out that their llamas have escaped and are way up on the side of the snow-covered mountain. So Haddock, who is now toasted, decides to set off after them. And Tintin is not able to talk him out of it, of course. And as he does so, as he's charging across the mountain, hollering at them, at the llamas, we see that the kidnappers are within view as well, and manage to spot Tintin and Zarina. The captain sees the kidnappers and begins running down the hill after them. He's heading down towards the kidnappers with some of his curses, his oaths: Patagonians, bashy bazooks, carpet sellers, kleptomaniacs. They're getting ready to fire on him when he begins stumbling again, becoming a gigantic snowball. This is probably one of my favorite gags in this volume. And so as he continues to snowball down towards them, they break ranks and begin running, but then they all start rolling, becoming snowballs themselves. And Captain Haddock, who's extremely lucky, is the one snowball who is stopped by a jutting rock while the rest of them fly over the cliff. and presumably to their deaths. Tintin says, you know, Zarina, the captain's guardian angel, has a full-time job. The captain reveals that he has 2 boxes of cartridges of ammunition still left in his pocket with a bit of newspaper wrapped around it, and Tintin tells him to take care of that newspaper. We might need it to light a fire. So this is sort of a little important thing that we'll need to remember later on in the story. So they head down in the mountains, and now they're going to have to cross some thick jungle before they get to some more mountains afterwards. Captain Haddock doesn't want to tackle the jungle just yet. He spots a cave up in the mountains. He says, why don't we spend the night up there? He says, he checks it out. It's okay. You can come on up. It's very snug. They seem to be shouting to him. He can't hear them. What? What is that? Why are you waving your arms for? What? What did you say? Shout louder. I can't hear you. Thundering typhoon, speak up. Can't you? There's a bear behind you. It's brilliant. So we're in the jungle now, and Captain Haddock, his torments do not cease. So now he's being bitten alive by mosquitoes, plagued by monkeys, falling into the swamp. One danger after another they encounter. Zarina is nearly killed by a python. A tapir nearly runs over, or does run over, Captain Haddock. Finally, they make camp in the jungle, and the next morning we see Captain Haddock is sleeping with a face full of ants. Ants have swarmed all over him. And who comes out but an anteater who begins licking his face. Captain Haddock is dreaming and thinks it's Snowy. He says, Snowy, go away, Snowy, leave me alone. He wakes up to see the anteater. Hop to it, you four-legged Casanova, he says. And they come to a river, and Captain Haddock notes that the tree trunks that Tintin spots floating down the river are actually alligators. He says, don't you believe it? They're alligators. Alligators, good heavens, I could have sworn. A natural mistake. They don't fool me. And of course, he's sitting right on one, which nearly swallows him before Tintin manages to shoot it. And so they make their crossing amidst many alligators now all swimming towards them. And we have a big shootout with the alligators. This is a really high adventure in this volume. You know, very different from the one before it, which was all very much like kind of like an Agatha Christie mystery. And this one, it's it's like a Haggard novel. And in more ways than one, too. It reminds me of something like King Solomon's Mines, stories of that type with, where you have these European adventurers going off to some exotic locale and then finding a lost city. Instead of a lost African city, in this case, we have a lost city of the Inca. And finally, they come out of the jungle, and Zarina says that up in those mountains is where they will find the Temple of the Sun. So now we're nearing the end of our journey, and they come to their last obstacle, a waterfall. So they sling a rope across and begin the crossing. It's a nice sequence with Captain Haddock, of course. You can never pass up an opportunity for some physical humor with Captain Haddock. So first manages to grab his hat as it falls off, and then he nearly falls off himself. We see here the rope is getting thin. but he does manage to get across before the rope snaps. But as Tintin makes his crossing, it does snap, and into the waterfall Tintin goes. And at first, Captain Haddock and Zarina believe that Tintin has died, that he doesn't come up. They believe he's been killed at the bottom of the waterfall. But then they start hearing voices. And it sounds like Tintin's voice. It says, "Captain Zarina. Tintin, Tintin, is it really you? Where are you?" "Here, behind the waterfall." "Behind the waterfall? How can you be behind the waterfall? Come down and you'll see." So they come down, and as they come down, a rock is thrown from out of the waterfall, and Tintin reveals to them that it's really just a thin curtain of water, and that you can pass through it into a cave or a chamber on the other side. So he ties the rock to the rope, throws the rope through, and then once Tintin has fastened the rope on the other side, they use the rope to pull themselves through and find themselves in a cave in the mountainside. And conveniently enough, the rocks, Tintin says, the rock of the cave is covered with some sort of phosphorescence, which gives off a little light, so they're not in complete darkness. Thank goodness for us. It wouldn't be such an interesting comic to look at. And they manage to make their way into what appears to be an old tomb, where they find some Incan mummies. And eventually they find a slab which looks like it might be some sort of doorway. And pushing it through, the three of them together, they do manage to come through right into what looks like a throne room full of colorfully costumed Incas. Another great scene. These scenes where you have lots of figures. Herge would usually put a panel like this in each volume. It was always a treat to get to one of these panels and to look at all the characters. And as he always does, you know, they're all well done. You could look at each character, and he doesn't fake it. And again, the design work, it's the same sort of design from the title page there. And they are taken prisoner and thrown into a cell before being brought before the great Inca himself on his throne. And the great Inca reveals to them that Professor Calculus will be put to death for the sacrilege that he's committed by wearing the bracelet of their ancestor. And they themselves will die with him for having violated, by coming into the Temple of the Sun by trickery, violating their sacred temple, as well as Zarina, who has helped them, will suffer the same fate as they will. Going back to the other page, I forgot to mention that while they're in their cell, Tintin gives the medal with the talisman that the Indian had given him, gives it to Zarina, thinking that it might help him out. And in fact, when the great Inca is passing judgment on Zarina, Tintin tells Zarina to bring out the medal and show it to them, which he does. He says, "Where did you steal that, you little viper?" Zarina says, "I didn't steal it, noble Prince of the Sun. He gave it to me, I didn't steal. And you, foreign dog, where did you get it? Like others of your kind, you robbed the tombs of our ancestors, no doubt." But before Tintin can answer, a voice comes from the side. "No, noble Prince of the Sun, I beg leave to speak." And here it is, the same Indian who gave the medal to Tintin earlier is now here in his official costume. He's revealed to be, his name is Huascar. He's a high priest of the sun god. And he says that it was he who gave it to Tintin, as he saw him come to the aid of Zorino when he was being attacked. And so the great Inca says that Huascar has done nobly, but his actions will only save the young Indian, for his life is now protected by the talisman, but of course Tintin and Haddock will still have to die. Nevertheless, I will grant them one favor, and it is this: within the next 30 days they must die, but they may choose the day and the hour when the rays of the sacred sun will light their pyre. And that is how they're going to die. They will die by the light of the sun itself. They'll be burned to death. And he says they must give their answer tomorrow. And so they're taken away to their prison, and Haddock is in a very gloomy mood, of course. And he finds the newspaper that he'd saved from earlier in his pocket, and he says, well, we shan't be needing this now. There will be a fire all right, but by thundering typhoons, we shan't be lighting it. Tintin is wondering how they're going to get out. The bars aren't going to be any good. They're too firmly fixed. Captain Haddock is grumbling about not having any matches. Tintin says, I've got a little magnifying glass, and he uses the magnifying glass to light his pipe, which delights Captain Haddock, until Tintin says, yes, that's precisely how the Incas will light their bonfire when they set about roasting us. Tintin sees that Snowy has been chewing up the newspaper that Haddock has discarded. Meanwhile, we're back to Thompson and Thompson that we left towards the beginning of this volume. And they're revealing to their inspector that they've searched South America from top to bottom without result. They've lost all trace of Tintin and Captain Haddock. They've decided to undertake a fresh search using an entirely new method. And the inspector says, well, what are your new methods? And they say, you must allow us to preserve absolute secrecy, sir. And their method turns out to be Calculus's pendulum. They're going to try to locate Tintin and company through the art of dowsing. So we'll see how their method works, how this transpires through the rest of the remaining pages of this volume. Tintin, meanwhile, is looking at the scrap of newspaper, and he finds something interesting in the newspaper. And with a little bit of thinking, all of a sudden he jumps up. He has a eureka moment, startling Captain Haddock, breaking his pipe once more. And he says that he's figured out the way to save them, but he won't tell Captain Haddock because he doesn't want to give him false hope, just in case. Thompson and Thompson, we see how their search is going. They're up in the Eiffel Tower. They say, how peculiar, the pendulum definitely indicates that they are somewhere up high. So the next morning, Tintin tells the great Inca that they have decided that they would like to die in 18 days' time at 11 o'clock. Says, it is my friend's birthday, and Haddock says, Tintin, you're crazy. You know it isn't my birthday. Tintin says, quiet, Captain. You promised to trust me. And so their wish is granted. And for the remainder of their time, they're given a very nice apartment to stay in, although they're still prisoner with bars on the window. And so over the next few days, we see Captain Haddock go through various stages of of denial, and then finally acceptance and anguish over his fate, while Tintin seems to be in very good spirits, exercising, lounging around. Thompson and Thompson still on their hunt. According to the pendulum, they're very low. At some point, Haddock, in a manic mood, manages to dislodge the bars from the window just in time for the guards to come in to collect them. He says, aha, we are just in time. The high priest and the guards tell them that they must put on these ceremonial robes, which look very, very clownish. And out there marched to the pyre that they have set up. Haddock makes one last attempt to make an escape, but of course does not succeed. He ends up bruised, tied up on the pyre, and then out comes a procession with Calculus, and there he is, got his own little pendulum, still using his pendulum. And of course, Calculus has no idea what's going on. He's been taken out of his coma, but he believes that they're in the middle of some sort of film production. He says, "Ah, the cinema, good. I quite understand. Some historical drama, no doubt. These people, they're dressed like Aztecs, I think, or rather, I should say, Incas. Yes, their makeup is perfect, and look at those dances, so natural. Who believed they're acting? And now it is the time of the hour of the sacrifice, and here we have Thompson and Thompson at the pyramids of Giza. According to the pendulum, they should be in a very hot spot, they say. And so Huascar comes out with the magnifying glass to begin the ceremony of lighting the kindling for the fire. And as they're pronouncing their ritual prayers, Tintin interrupts them. "Stay, Huascar, the sun god will not hear your prayers. O magnificent sun, if it is thy will that we should live, give us a sign." The great Inca tells him to be silent. How dare you call upon the sun? But Tintin continues. And as he does so, what happens but an eclipse begins happening. The sun begins disappearing as the Earth's shadow moves across it, turning day into night, startling the Incas, and everyone begins scurrying about in a panic. Haddock realizes that this has been Tintin's plan all along, that he read about the eclipse in the newspaper, and that he's using this as a way to get them to be free. And Calculus, meanwhile, what superb acting, and they look genuinely terrified, and what an idea to wait for a real eclipse. Brilliant. The Inca says, "Mercy, O stranger, I implore you, make the sun show his light again, and I will grant whatever you desire." "So be it, noble Inca, I accept your word. Have no fear, I will entreat the sun to reappear." And of course, timing it perfectly as he does so, that the eclipse begins ending, the sun reappears, and they are released from their bonds, allowing Captain Haddock to do one last stunt as he falls into the logs of the pyre, causing Thompson and Thompson to say, "Still nothing, yet the pendulum shows they're getting bumped about." And so we come to nearly the end of the story. The great Inca keeps his word. He will allow them to go free. Tintin, before they do so, Tintin asks him about the explorers and the coma and the seizures that they have at the same time every day, and he asks them what is behind that, all of that. And so the great Inca leads them down into an underground chamber where he reveals, looks like voodoo dolls or waxen images with pins stuck in them. So they've been working magic on them at the same time every day, tormenting them. But he says that he will release them from the spell, and as they cast the images into the fire back in Europe, one by one the explorers awake, wondering where they are, what's been happening all this time. And to top it all off, and to show his gratitude, I guess, for bringing back the sun, the great Inca allows them to see the great treasure hoard of the Incas that has been preserved for all these centuries and was kept hidden from the Spanish conquistadors. They never found the real treasure of the Inca, which is still kept in vaults down below the Temple of the Sun. He leads them down into a secret chamber, and as they go in, we see Thompson and Thompson are now at the South Pole looking for them, shivering. See, the treasure of the Incas, for which the Spanish conquerors searched in vain for so long. And so with their saddlebags loaded up with a little bit of the treasure, they are freed, let free to go. And as they get ready to say goodbye to their guides, Captain Haddock says, "We hang on to my gun for a second. Of course, what's up?" Goes to get a drink of water. Water? The captain drinking water? I'd never have believed the day would come. Calculus says, "Rum, you think so?" He goes over and he gives the llama a dousing. "Nothing against you personally, but that pays a very old debt," he says. The end. So, really fun adventure, well drawn. The one big criticism that I have about this particular book is the whole idea that a civilization like the Inca, who would have had some advanced knowledge about the sun, whose religion was centered on worship of the sun god, and clearly would have had some astronomical knowledge, would not know anything about solar eclipses, seems pretty hard to imagine or to believe. So the idea that the Tintin could fool them with a trick as simple as that is just not believable. And indeed, Herge said so later. He said that this whole idea that they would be tricked by this solar eclipse was just implausible. And I think I remember reading that there's a story that Christopher Columbus actually used this trick, how he had read in an astronomical almanac about an approaching eclipse, and that he used this to get an advantage over some native people in the Caribbean. So whether Herge heard that same story and used it for inspiration, I'm not sure. But other than that, one of the stronger books of the series, and certainly one of the more colorful and more pleasing to read. Okay. That's it for this time, and please join me again when we read The Land of Black Gold.